And that little girl was me.
Hi, hon. How are you today?
I'm
How are
great.
you?
How are you?
Good. I'm
I'm
good.
good. Happy Thursday.
Happy Thursday, honey. We are making it through another week. Amen.
Trying.
Yes.
So, what's been going on with you, identity professor?
I am solidifying some things, man. I've been making some moves and some things that I cannot talk about right now at this moment, but just say we got some big things popping really soon.
Well, that's a blessing.
It is.
And I want to give a shout out to one of my babies, one of my very good friends, and she's also an alumnus of the Texas Southern University. She and her sister, Juanita Sharkey, they brought the hot dog. What is it called? The hot dog. And I'm trying to give her a shout out. Lord, I'd have messed up the shout out. the hot dog company or whatever, Portia Williams' boyfriend or husband's little hot dog.
Oh yeah.
In Houston. So yeah. Big ups to them. I'm going to choose some. Well, I don't eat wieners, but I'm gonna go and play with the mustard.
Okay, well listen, come on, big ups to Texas Southern University alumnus, franchising, bringing things to Houston, making money, making moves. We always love to see our alum do well. Wendell, you are most definitely have been inspiring me since coming back to Houston. Because baby, I had to hit the ground running. You was like, oh, you got to do this. I was like, oh, yes, sir. Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah. This pandemic has taught us a lot of things, but what it has truly taught us is who we are at the end of the day. Either you are a hustler or you are a victim. And some of us are choosing to be hustlers and making things happen during this pandemic versus sitting in a corner and crying, woe is me. So somebody has to get out and fight for us.
That's right. So tell us about this guest that we have tonight, honey, because I heard that she is fire.
She is beyond fire, okay? Because it's very few people can leave me speechless. And she's one of those that I just say, okay, let me let her finish. I'm going to let her get to her. I'm going to let her get to the period, okay? Because I want to make sure that I can use my context clues when I'm talking to her. But before we get to her, make sure you all share, and like. Go to our YouTube channel. That's Truth to Power Uncut. Make sure you subscribe and share to a friend. We're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, and we are on Instagram. So in your Insta story, if you don't mind sharing us, because we know that more people check out your Insta story than your actual page, because they go to Facebook for that. And if you're on Twitter, just drop at least 7 words for us and put a period at the end. And we're going to appreciate it, and tag us if you can, because at the end of the day, we're trying to fight the power, and we're doing it with our truth, and our truth comes to our communication. So Rebecca Wilcox is the special guest for this evening. And this is an extra special young lady. I had the privilege of meeting her I don't know how many, about 3 years ago, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. But I'm gonna let her come on and tell you more about herself. But what I will tell you is that she is nobody's plaything. Hi, Rebecca.
Rebecca, how are you?
Hey, thanks so much for having me, y'all. So I just want to say, I still call him Coach King. Coach King actually trained me in debate. My first real robust training, I think it was like 2015. It was a minute ago. Yeah. It was 2015, 2016, because Clark Atlanta was just getting their new president that was coming out of you all's department, business department or something like that.
The dean of the School of Business.
Yeah, so it was that year. I was president of the debate team, and so we went to Texas Southern to go get trained by Coach King and Dr. Freeman. And it was the best experience of my life because it was like boot camp. I was running resolutions back and forth, running it. And I understand why they're the best. We gave them their crown. We were like, look, we don't ever have to compete with y'all. Y'all could just, say y'all trained us and we'll ride the coattail of your legacy. So I'm just I'm happy to be here having a conversation with y'all.
She's being modest. She's being modest though, because she was no pushover. So she was not just a member of the Clark's team. She was the person that actually got them to start the debate team. She went in and fought for the funding that they needed. She did all of this as an undergrad. She fought for the funding that they needed. They got the money. They flew them to Houston, put them up at the hotel, and they had beautiful blazers that they were putting out on us. So no, she did the work of an alumnus or a faculty member. She did it as a student. And then we set it up where they had the opportunity to meet the dean of the School of Business, which was going to be their next semester president. And so they had an opportunity to meet him. And this was the beauty of it. And this tells so much about her. About 6 months after he got there, I'm scrolling through social media and she is holding him to the fire. And I said, girl, that's how you do that.
I still don't think he likes me very much. No. I think he just ended his term. I think they just got a new president. French, he came from another HBC. I don't know. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Our people going on HBCUs. But I mean, what we will say is that you are the personification of Black girl magic, and we want our audience to learn everything about you that they can.
Ooh, where do we?
So let's jump on into it. So tell us and tell our viewers about who Rebecca Wilcox is.
Okay, well, today Rebecca Wilcox is stressed because she just started the fall semester of her PhD program. And yeah, so I'm getting my PhD in religion and society. So I'm training in critical theory, Black studies. And yeah, it's my second year, my first semester as a PhD student. I go to Princeton Theological Seminary, and it's been a great experience so far, but it is also like trying me to my limits in the academy. What I'm learning about the academy is that as much as it's supposed to be the place of academic freedom, it is also a politic, just as every other institution, you know? And what it means for me to write and study in this political climate and be honest and integral with my work has been very stressful as it relates to being in predominantly white spaces, and also understanding the commodity of Black academics who don't necessarily share my commitments. So that's been a war in and of itself. But Rebecca's doing good.
A whole bunch. So it comes my audience because you come down my alley because I'm finishing my PhD in sociology and criminology. So when you are talking about religion and society, immediately what comes to mind is James Cone, right? Like, God of the oppressed. So can you just give our viewers just a little snippet of what that means to be a PhD student studying religion and society?
Yeah, so this is probably not important, but so there's a difference between religion, the study of the religious studies, and then theology. I am not a theologian. Theology is more so a commitment to God talk as it relates to doctrinal commitments to questions about God and like understanding the meaning of life as it relates to God. Religious studies is all more so about how do people make meaning out of life. And that's more so me. I'm not committed to the doctrine of Christianity, of religions in particular. James Cone, I think, would be more of a Black liberation theologian. I'm very opposed to that category of Black liberation theology. I'm still finding my way through it.
Okay.
But what I will say is that what Cone has done for the Black Religious Academy and what his work illuminates, at least for me as a young burgeoning scholar, is the ability to take the political climate and kind of make light out of what the parallels are between what we say about God, what we say about Western world, what we say about colonialism, and the practical implications of that. So I don't think Black religious scholars are doing what Cone did. So I'm always like a little bit, airy when people start name dropping Cone, because I'm like, it's Cone, and then there's like
everybody else,
Cone scholars, right? they may not be talking about the same Cone that I've read. So yeah,
I love it.
I think that she's still being modest. Where did you get your master's?
I got my master's from Vanderbilt, yeah, and then I got a bachelor's from Princeton.
Yes. So I just want to make sure that, everybody know that I'm 100% pro HBCU, but I'm not anti PWI because I'm a firm believer that the only way to make changes is to become a part of the system that makes the changes. So I applaud you. She's just spectacular. But anyway, my question was, I framed at first, I want to reshape it. It was, how do you get world news? Like, what are some sources, some areas that you go to for the news? But I want to reframe that, and I want to ask you, one, do you think we need world news, or should we be focused in on just what we're dealing with in the United States?
Oh no. So I'm an internationalist, right? And this, you and I have talked about this. This has everything to do with how I understand the political climate, how I understand voting. For me, you cannot adequately diagnose the problems in America without understanding imperialism, which means in some sense you have to have a global understanding of how colonialism has affected and shaped the diaspora across the board, right? That's just where I enter the conversation. And so I'm actually very critical of political commentary that doesn't have an international lens, because it centers in a lot of ways the Black American experience as the most oppressed experience. And I'm not interested in the oppression Olympics as much as I'm interested in global solidarity and how liberation movements in some way doesn't just benefit this identity politic of Blackness, but this condition, right? This actual condition that is diasporic for me. So I think the way that I engage news is not necessarily just through the propaganda of media outlets, but it is in community with organizers, right? In community with activists. I don't like the word activists. More so I would say like scholars, burgeoning scholars, but not necessarily in the academy, but people who do political education. And a lot of times those people are, on social media outlets, and just in community with my comrades, the people that I know that are on the ground, fighting police brutality, fighting gentrification, fighting all types of stuff, fighting poverty, fighting COVID, fighting Donald Trump, and fighting Biden. So, those are the ways that we communicate where we are, what's going on in the world. And news is not just like breaking news. The biggest topic, Kamala Harris has now secured the vice president nomination. News is like somebody raising a GoFundMe and saying, hey, I'm getting evicted because I haven't had a check since April. Who can help me fundraise this? You know what I'm saying? So the way that I engage news is like, what's the need? How do we understand what's going on with our folks and our people that we're in community with? And that's the type of politics that I respond to.
I love that. I really love that. And I love the way you put that, because I find myself being overwhelmed with politics. And when I say politics, I'm not talking about necessarily the presidential election and all of that, but I mean politics, period. Politics in corporate America, politics in academia, politics in the church. I'm overwhelmed with it. And so I'm at a place where I see it everywhere I go. And even when it's not supposed to be seen, I see it. And so it makes me wonder, okay, well, what is the background story on this person? Because I always look at people like, there's so much trauma, right? And so we don't talk about trauma and how trauma impacts our politics, how trauma impacts our government, how trauma impacts Christianity, how trauma impacts education. And I think that that's a part that we do miss out. So I like how you put that, because we don't talk about these things. Like I thought about Jacob Blake's 3 kids. Breaking news to me is that those 3 Black boys witnessed what happened to their dad. And so in about 15 years, they're going to be men. And we don't know how that's going to impact their future. So nobody's talking about that. And to me, that's the most important part of the story, is that his 3 sons witnessed this. So I liked how you put that. Thank you for that. That was really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so you said a lot of things, and again, like you're down my street. Like when you're talking about religion and society, that's not very far away from sociology, right?
It's very interdisciplinary. Yeah,
it's very interdisciplinary. And so you talked about imperialism and you talked about colonialism. Like, what do you, if you had to capture it as this scholar, how would you explain it to people who've never just taken the time to understand imperialism or colonialism and its impact on Black identity?
Okay, I hate this question, guys. Let me tell you why, though. Because this has been the ongoing debate that people have been having on Twitter about the accessibility of language, right? And particularly for those of us who come out of the academy, the question is always like, how are you supposed to make this accessible to the masses? And for me, that becomes a loaded question, because on one end, there is something very violent about academic language that is inaccessible to the masses, right? I want to acknowledge that. On the other end, we know as people who come through the academy that a lot of what we know is deeply embedded in study. right? And so you have to have a commitment to learning things, and that way it illuminates your capacity to understand the inaccessibility of what we're talking about, right? And so the reason why that becomes a loaded question is because we can talk about imperialism and we can be reductionist, right? And we can just say, oh, imperialism is, the conquering of the Western world through the militarization of wars and bombs and stealing of land, right? And we can just name the Native Americans, and we can just name, the transatlantic slave trade, and all the kind of simple things that people will have like a meta understanding of. But then when we get to how this functions, it becomes historical to talk about imperialism, because it becomes, oh, that was the Native Americans, that was the transatlantic slave trade. And so people can't see the residue of that today because we've overdetermined the category as something that was pre-colonial. And that is where study comes in for me, because I don't know if my job is to make this accessible more than it is to get you to commit to the study of it, right? And so when I'm talking about imperialism and I'm talking about Barack Obama as representational politics, but he is the president of the United States who drops drones in the Global South, where kids go to school just on their way to school, and then there are bombs are dropping out of the air. That's when I'm talking about 21st century imperialism, because that is the militarization of what the American empire engages in, and that is the residue of imperialism. And that becomes difficult because it's like, well, he's the first Black president and he's not Trump. And so then imperialism is stuck in this trap of being historical. You know what I'm saying? And so for me, I think it's less about the accessibility of how do we communicate this than how do we organize people to commit to the study of these things where we're not overlooking the residue of it today. Right. And I can't work with people who are not committed to the study. And I don't mean committed to the study in an academic way where we're like, oh, read this book and do this. I mean, like, who are you in community with to really hold these people in power accountable? Who are you learning with? Who are you being vulnerable enough to ask questions with? Because that's the only way the movement is working on my end. I'm not sitting at my desk 24/7 reading books all day, but what I am doing is being in community with people virtually and internationally about what the heck is going on in their communities, because that's the only way I'm understanding the residue of imperialism and its ongoing effects today. Does that make sense?
Listen, you see my face lighting up. I'm so excited right now. It's hard to know what to do with myself. Like, I think so it leads me to this other question, because now you're saying that, the definition of imperialism is not static, right? Like, it's dynamic. It's something that you have to deal with over time, and you have to take the time to study these things over time. How did it show up in 1619? How did it show up in 1492? How did it show up in 2019? How is it showing up now in 2020? Like, how did this thing show up? How did it transmorify? How did it transmutate itself over time? So I think that's deep. Can I say?
It's this pervasive. It's this pervasive effect to where you have to then begin to understand imperialism as the police state.
Yes.
And when you get there, a lot of our faves start going out the window, right? This has been the critique of Kamala Harris. I know that's your girl, Coach King, but this is where it goes, right? Because when we start doing the study of imperialism, we have to be honest about the police state and what that means today, and how we've overlooked imperialism at the hands of Black people, and this idea that Black people are not complicit in imperialism. And I'm just like, I don't know if I can go that far with people.
Go that far. I mean, go there. So explain that to the audience.
I mean, like, it's the reality of the situation is there are no good cops. And I don't say that in the sense that I recognize that there are people who join the police force because they really want to make change, right? They really feel like there's something that they can do in some way to change the nature of policing in this country and public safety. The reality of the situation is that in order to become a police officer, you have to undergo a police training, right? And the police training is trained to protect the state, which means this. When you see police officers unlawfully at protests tear gassing protesters who are disrupting the status quo they don't have weapons, right? They're antagonistic to the status quo and things as normal as protesters should be, right? When you see that and you see that the police officer is on the other side of the street with the gun or with the tear gas ready to react, then you understand that the training of the officer is to protect the state, right? So that means that it doesn't matter what officer is having a good day or what officer might pick a child up from school and take them home safely. When it's all said and done, the police is going to protect the state. And that is why the slaughter of Black bodies and Black people at the hands of the police is such an epidemic, because they are trained and they commit to a training of policing. And I think that doesn't change or waver based upon one's commitment. The other side of this, it's arrogant for any individual person, and this is the problem with the billionaire system in this country, that any individual person thinks that they alone can solve the problems of imperialism and military and policing and white supremacy and racism. No person individually can solve those issues. So if you join the police force thinking that you can be the good cop and make change, it's illegitimate, because the police state is the police state, and the police state will turn on you the day that you want to be a Jesus for other people. And that's just what it means to be the police state. You know what I mean? And so I think that it becomes a sense of arrogance, because what it means to do things in community with people and to resist as a community is to recognize that no individual person has the power or the capacity to overthrow any of this. Because if that was to happen, then that Turner rebellion and all the other rebellions to follow would have been ended the casualties of Blackness in this country, and that's just not what we see. And so it's listening to how people are talking about systematically these things functions and may call for the abolition of something.
Well, I want to make sure you know that I don't defend the police at all. Actually, I attack them every week. So I want to make sure that we're clear that when she said that, viewers, as you know, I am not here for the police.
I was talking about the Kamala reference.
I know. She was talking about Kamala. Sorry. She was talking about Kamala, not the police themselves, because I do not stand for that. I'm one that actually thinks that they shouldn't be just defunded. They should be abolished. And we should start all over again, because it was created to catch slaves, catch Negroes, and protect white people from Negroes. So I don't feel like any part of that system, along with the entire Constitution, should be abolished, in my opinion, and start all over from scratch. But what I do want to say is that I believe that this goes back to what I was saying about the trauma that people deal with that no one sees, because when we are formally educated, we become a part of systems also, because we are also trained to believe things. We're trained to follow certain guidelines and standards. And unfortunately, Kamala, as well as Joe Biden, are from generations that were truly uneducated when it came to certain things, certain aspects of life, certain aspects of government, because they was kept from them. So I don't defend Kamala or Joe Biden. I think that everybody should be held responsible for the mistakes that they made. But I also believe in forgiveness, because I'm a man of a particular age now. And so I've done some things that I've needed forgiveness from. And I've done, and right now, people are expecting me to make this great announcement that I'm going to be running for something, but I'm still in the back room with everyone trying to figure out how we're going to fix things. So that's why I understand forgiveness, because I understand that sometimes we make these mistakes because we think we're doing the right thing. We truly, honestly feel like we're doing the right thing, and then 5 years from that, you find out that what you thought was right was wrong. Everything you were taught that you said that you believed in was incorrect.
I feel in my spirit she about to just rip you.
No. I'm
not gonna rip that.
No. We agreed.
I'm not gonna rip that.
No, it's not so much that I disagree with your sentiment about forgiveness, right? Even though it's a hard one for me to work through as a young person, you know, right? But I want to kind of put this is my point about colonialism in and of itself, that one of the things that Christianity represents out of these like moral ethics that we start talking about forgiveness and kindness and love, right? it is not that I don't agree with those ethics. I think that they're too objective when talking about the condition of Black folks, right? So I think that you can't be that abstract when you're talking about the conditions of Black folks. And so this becomes this meta narrative of like, everyone does wrong, and we all sin to some extent, and no sin is greater than the other. And I disagree. There's a difference between somebody serving office for 8 years, killing innocent children with drone strikes, putting people in prison, life sentences, right? And an individual who made some bad mistakes, probably stole something, probably cursed somebody out, probably slept with somebody's husband. Those things are very different. They're different. And a lot of times it's not a difference based upon the individual. It's the institution that wields the power to allow that particular act to be exacerbated. You know what I'm saying? So I think that is the difference when we're talking about Kamala. It's not so much Kamala, but it's that we understand that you work with the state to where you would even think that was okay. That families, right? Families are incarcerated, and still you're trying to run for a higher position of power when people are still in prison because of an order that you signed. So the forgiveness thing becomes, how can we forgive you without not putting you in more positions of power? Because as much as I can forgive you, I don't have to forgive you and allow you to prove your forgiveness in a higher position of power. You need to be deplatformed, right? And that's just what it is, because you don't have the political education yet to understand that the system that you want to protect is anti-Black. And that's just where I land. Yeah.
Right. Well, I'm going to go to the next question. We'll have a sidebar conversation, but I'm going to go to the next question because I want to know, because you being you kind of like millennial / Gen Z. So a lot of studies have already been done that pretty much show that millennials and Gen Z feel a lot of pressure under this social media thing that we have turned into and this new world that we are in. So do you ever get overwhelmed, like extremely overwhelmed? And if you do, how do you normally deal with it? How do you normally come out of it?
Yes and no. So like, I get overwhelmed with social media in the gimmicky nature of it, because so much of social media is associated to capital. So, right, it's not enough to just be smart. You got to perform a politic. You got to be attractive. You have to. It's so many ways in which anti-Blackness reads on our bodies, right? So it's like it's not just that your gift will make room for you. You also have to figure out how to get capital off your gift and what you're good at. And I think that type of capitalistic nature for me becomes very uncomfortable, because I only have my truth, and I know sometimes my truth is performative because my truth is associated to my politic, and we have to perform our politics. That's just the world we live in. But at the same time, I'm like, I don't always know how to not then, judge myself, or not then, be very critical or hypercritical about the nature of people who might actually just be genuinely trying to engage, the world through social media. I don't know how to not be hypercritical of them when I understand that this entire project is violent. So I think I've become overwhelmed of how to mediate the fact that some people just want to be Instagram stars, and they deserve to be that because capitalism is that bad. And if you making money off of how many likes you get, then by all means, because that's how a lot of people got to eat. But at the same time, I'm like, we're selling so many of the wrong shadows for me, that's kind of overlooking I think the political cries of people who are really suffering. You know what I mean? So it's more important for us to be proud about, I don't know, the representation of historically Black colleges, or the representation about Greek fraternities, and all things that I occupy. But on the other side of that is like, it co-opts what people are actually asking of us, which is to be in solidarity with the poor, right? And understand what that means. We're not asking to make a Black woman represent us. We're asking about, can you do something for the condition of the poor? And that gets conflated with the shadows that we sell.
I love that.
Very interesting things that you've said. One, you said that, you talked about, you alluded to the violence of social media. And I want you to explain that so people can really understand what you're talking about. And then the other thing is about these shadows, because as soon as you said that, I immediately thought of Plato's allegory of cave, right? And so I hear a lot of it, and I also hear a lot of marks too.
Oh, all day.
Marxism 101.
So tell us about those two things. Talk about the violence, and then talk about the shadows.
I'm laughing because Coach E is like, duh, she's a Marxist.
I hear you like, I'm not going to sell my purpose.
Maybe if it was 1400s right now, she would be the one on the cross with the fire lid.
This is so funny. Yeah, so like, I don't think, so let me use Twitter, for example. Well, I think social media space in and of itself is classes, right? So Facebook is more so of, the elites. I think the elites are still on Facebook. Your colleagues, you probably engage your colleagues more on Facebook. Instagram is that's kind of like the middle class, everybody just trying to get it where they live. And then Twitter is the neutralizing platform where everybody's voice matters. Everybody gets 140 characters set to say whatever they're going to say, right? And you have, people who have more followers than others. There's a politic to the followers. There's a capital to the followers. But if I just use Twitter, for example, what I mean by violent is that knowledge production happens on Twitter, right? The original question that you all asked me about news. People are updated, are learning, are reading threads, are really engaging things of the world through Twitter. Because you can't organize a politic of care, of respect, of actual engagement, of vulnerability, it becomes violent when people are genuinely asking questions or genuinely have never heard of certain things, or even when people misgender other people, you know what I mean? Even when it's clear that, their pronouns is right there in their bio and they still overlook it and misgender it. I don't think that there is a space for transformative justice to really take place on social media, which means that it becomes carceral. It becomes a place where people are attacked. People are not actually engaging what the person is saying or even committed to this person's transformation. And the reality is you can't be committed to nobody's transformation you're not in community with, right? And that's just the nature of social media. It is not a place of vulnerability. And so a lot of the things that may be well-intended or a lot of the aims that people may have to actually work through some things becomes a site of violence. And that's uncontrollable on the internet. And I just think that people need to know that before they jump out there making claims, because the reality of the situation is even if something is done and it's not ill-willed, it can still be violent. And nobody knows who you're in community with, right? Nobody knows who are the people checking you. Why did you even think it was okay to say this? So that becomes grounds for people to respond. And people are going to defend themselves no matter what. So I think that becomes the nature of the violence, where it's not, it doesn't leave room for engagement. It doesn't leave room for study and for vulnerability and for people to actually converse and learn. It leaves room for a battleground. And
that's interesting. It also is like, if you take into account the lack of engagement, like this is a false reality. So when you're looking at these things, especially stuff that hasn't been vetted, you look at it and you're like, it can cause some type of psychological violence, like even within the psyche, right? Like you're looking at these things, all of these things are being thrown to you, and your mind doesn't even have the space to process what it should be taking in and what it should not be taking in.
And also, this is the first time a lot of people have ever heard these things before. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? Like, I have to constantly check my privilege. Like, I'm in Princeton talking about this for a living. Like, I get paid to talk about these things, right? And I have to name that, as opposed to someone who just gets on Twitter and reads a thread of mine and has never heard of this before. And so I do think it's my responsibility to respond with a level of care. And I also think it's my responsibility to respond to violence, right? And disarm violence. However that may look, depending on if the person is willing to engage or if the person just wants to assert and be loud and fight. And they probably met their match if they're dealing with me that day. So it's just, it's just, but I do think that there is no way to mediate those real concerns, which then becomes a cycle of violence. And what was your other question? I'm sorry, I forgot.
The second question was about the shadows, but I mean, on the wall. But I also want to know, because I hear you talking about the work that you do, and I hear you say community. You say, how are you engaging? How are you working with? How are you interacting with? And so do you feel like, and I think I probably know the question, but do you feel like you work better alone, or do you feel like you work better with others?
Oh, that's such an interesting question, because when I got to Princeton, everyone was telling me there's no community there. Like you're not gonna find a good Black community. You probably gonna have to go to Harlem or Philly, that's around the corner. And I was just like, it's never been a requirement for me to be productive, but I've also never been in a white space. So I didn't really understand what they meant by that until I got to Princeton. Because even Vanderbilt was like Black Vandy. They had a lot of Black staff there, a lot of Black students there. So I think that I learn in community, if that makes better sense. And I also think that community is not necessarily people that agree with my politics, right? So me and Coach King are perfect examples of this, because as much as we have points of departures, we're both committed to engagement, right? So I automatically assume that whatever Coach King is going to say today, it is not intended to be violent. And if I find it to be violent, he's not above reproach, where I can't respond and say, perhaps this is, and vice versa. And I think that's what I mean by community, is people that are committed to transformation. But also, I wouldn't be doing that if I didn't know Coach King. You know what I'm saying? Because I've taken the responsibility of saying we are in community with each other, and therefore I'm committed to growing with you. The minute that people are not committed to that, they don't have to teach you. And that becomes the critique of whiteness, right? It's not my responsibility to teach you anti-Blackness. You know it. You live it for a living. Go figure that out. And I know that that's difficult, but it becomes a consumption of labor on the person who not only has to live anti-Blackness, but then has to tell people who are willfully obtuse about it, what it is and what it looks like. And so I find my survival and my learning in my group to only be done in community. But there are moments where I have to silence engagement to understand what I know and what I believe to be true. And how can I stand 10 toes on that? Because a lot of times you do get on social media, and even with the people who agree with your radicalness and they agree with, and you agree with theirs, there are still points of departure. And you have to know why you are saying what you're saying and be open to, your limitations. I know I have limitations, because there are levels that I'm yet not there. And it's probably because I haven't read the book yet, or it's probably because I haven't really understood the concept or the philosophy, but I have limitations. There's places that I'm not willing to go. And I just think that you just have to know how that functions.
Yeah, I think that, well, first off, there was a recent example of when I needed Rebecca to, tap me on my shoulders, because I went on one of my rampage. I would go on a rampage. I normally delete it in 24 hours, but I'll go on it. And I said something about Melania Trump. I think I actually posted a picture of her. I don't remember, because I deleted it, because Rebecca so kindly came underneath it. And she challenged me, right? She challenged me as far as, pretty much, it was, long story short, it was pretty much saying that, how is this helping? And are you accidentally doing the same thing that we're fighting against? Mm-hmm. And I needed that, because you know how I am. I would drop one sentence and it would just shake the foundation. So I normally play word games with people to make them feel silly. Like, babe, I just said one sentence. You take it the way you want, right? But she was very direct, and you knew what you were doing. This was very clear. And I think that you should just simply know better. And immediately, it didn't take me but 1 second to say, you're right, I'm sorry. And I said, let me get this out here. And I started going crazy trying to delete it. Wouldn't delete. I was going crazy, because I had made it like my default picture or something. I was like, why is it not leaving? But
I think it's a name that I felt like I had the space to do that, because I was with you. You know what I'm saying? And there's a politic of trust in place where you know that I'm not trying to attack you or punish you, where I'm really trying to be committed to your transformation in that moment. And I'm saying this is why I don't think that transformation can happen outside of the community. Yeah. Because if somebody is just commenting on my status, I don't know your intentions, and I don't know if you're really trying to engage me. And a lot of times people are not,
Yeah,
Mhm.
resistance comes in.
Right.
Resistance because you feel like they're being agitators. Like if I don't know you, if I'm not comfortable with you, and you are inviting yourself into my space, then I feel as though I have to go on defense. And that's what makes it it just makes it counterproductive. So I completely think that it is correct, and I love that about you. But what is it that Rebecca aspires to be? Because you have so many irons in the fire, as the old people would say. But what is it that Rebecca aspires to be 20 years from now?
Okay. So I have to be transparent with y'all because I'm an abolitionist and because I am an Afro pessimist very seriously. I don't know that I have aspirations more than I have commitments. You know what I'm saying? So like, I think if you would ask me this two years ago, maybe even a year ago, I would have said, y'all want to be a professor, a political commentator. I would have, but now that I'm really taking seriously the fact that we're about to enter into post-COVID, right? Which is an era all in and of itself. And that 400 people have already received eviction letters because they have not paid their rent since March. I don't know that I care too much to become anything in this political climate beyond community for people. And that's not me trying to be deep. That's really me like being paranoid about the world that we live in right now. And I'm not fixated on what I want to be. And I hope, like my hope is that I can finish my PhD program, get into a tenure track position, teach, write a really good book that will speak to the political climate. But I also know that like if I feel called and convicted elsewhere, that's what I'm going to do.
You remind me, and I told you this also, you remind me so much of myself when I was a sophomore and a junior and a senior in college. Everything you say always reminds me of things that I did and that I said. But I'll never forget when I had got caught between a rock and a hard place, something else that old people say. And President Slade, Priscilla Slade, she was the president at that time at Texas Southern University. She had to save me, right? Because Dr. Freeman couldn't get me out of it. Dr. Ward couldn't get me out of it. I needed the person at the top because I had done something just that severe in fighting and being a revolutionary. And so she told me, she said, this is okay. And it's okay for you to feel this way. It's okay for you to be mad. It's okay for you to cry. She said, but just know in 10 years, you're going to see this differently. In 20 years, you're going to see it even more differently. And in 30 years, you may actually end up back where you are right now as far as your anger, your emotions. But her point was that experiences will be coupled with that drive, that passion that you have. And so those experiences will start changing. And I hope that what you don't do is something that I started doing and I fight my way through it every day. And that is, I hope that you don't cave in to those experiences, because those experiences will chip away at you, and before you know it, you conform, and you didn't mean to conform, and you feel as though you didn't conform. You feel as though you are still standing in that truth, but slowly you have been given a little piece here, a little piece there, a little piece there, a little piece there, and before you know it, you can't recognize yourself. But then you find yourself being a Dr. Lomas. I know you don't know who that is, but he was a professor at Texas Southern, but he was a 65-year-old true revolutionary in 1960s. I'm ready. Like he was Black Panther Party ready, right? At 65. But I always look at him as that person because he went through all of those phases because of experiences, but he stayed true to who he was. And it may not have gotten him all of the gold that he would have desired at 18 years old. He didn't become that billionaire that he probably could have become. But I think that when he died on July 5th, I think he died satisfied and full. So I think that would be you.
I think that's thank you so much for affirming that in me, because one of the things I've been wrestling with is Angela Davis's visibility in this current climate. She, of course, has been a radical leader that I've read her work and I have taken her work as Bible for me. And then to see her on the Red Table Talk, or to see her saying we need to, vote, things like that, has confused me with what I understand her abolitionist politics to be. But it's also like, anytime people ask me where can I start with abolition, I'm going to tell them Our Prison's Obsolete by Angela Davis, because that politic is still what it is. You know what I mean? And the reason why I think this is important, because one thing that people have to, even the most radical of us, have to acknowledge about whiteness is that it wears on you, right? And because whiteness is that bad, and I think sometimes we act like it's not, right? Because trying to survive and stay alive in an anti-Black world is that bad, the best of us will have our limitations, right? And that is so important to me, because it's like, where Angela Davis stops does not have to be where I am. You know what I mean? But it also is me understanding that she's stopping there for a reason. And that reason is not just because she has decided this is what she believes, more so than I really do believe that it is the residue of fighting anti-Blackness every day. So, and it knocks the fight out of you. It will knock the wind out of you. You know what I mean? And I know that I'm 25 and I got a little bit more fight than Angela Davis might be at a point where she, not only, because the thing about Angela Davis for me is not only was she fighting anti-Blackness as it relates to white people during the climate that they were in, right? Not only was she being jailed because of the incident with the Soledad brothers and being charged, but like, very seriously, Angela Davis was fighting neoliberal Blacks too. You know what I mean? Like, she was not the prominent voice of her contemporaries. She was written off as the radicals, and that creates so much invisibility for an individual who is so committed to a politic and has to kind of go underground to kind of teach people and organize people, because the mainstream world has completely rendered them too radical for their voice to be taken seriously. And now she's finally getting a platform that all of her contemporaries have had her entire career. You know what I'm saying? So it makes sense for her, in my mind, to be like, I want to bask in this a little bit. Now, we may critique you. We may be like, you giving in or all that other stuff, but it's also knowing that we all have limitations. What I will say is that I am far more radical than I was in undergrad. Which you are. You know, like I have actually done the opposite and gradually been radicalized as I've gotten older. And I don't know what my limitations are going to be, you know? But I'm at seminary saying abolish Christianity. So that's what
You can't get any far left than that. But I had a conversation I was honored and privileged to have a conversation with Angela Davis and Jane Elliott in December of 2019. And it was one of the most outstanding moments of my life to be able to have just this very closeted conversation it was just myself and 3 other individuals with them, because they were in Houston doing some lectures at U of H and Texas Southern together. They were doing it together. But one thing that Angela kind of gave me in that moment was that she was basking, like you're saying, pretty much. She was basking in the fruits of her labor, you might say, because we may feel like we haven't gotten enough or we haven't gotten anywhere. But for those people that were fighting the fight in the 60s, they look at today and they're like, my God, look how far we've come. And so when I saw her standing for Joe Biden, number one, I realized that she was doing it because the person that is in office is going to ultimately destroy the United States, and he doesn't care about Black and brown people at all. So that's one thing. But the number 2 thing is, I think that she's looking at the fact, she's not looking at Kamala. She's just looking at, oh my God, a Black woman can be vice president and could possibly be the first female president. And I think that is more important to her, because I think that she's at a place where she's already in history, but she's trying to make sure that when she closes her eyes, there is another step of history for Black people to make. So I think that's what I think. She didn't say that because, of course, old girl she was still running for president at the time. She wasn't running for vice president. But I do know that
she's been very critical. She's said Biden is not the best candidate. You know, I don't want to make it seem like she's like Biden 2020. And I don't know why she's inspired by Kamala. Like, you know, I'm sure she has her own reasons.
But I don't think she's inspired by Kamala. I don't think she's inspired by Kamala. I think that you're right. I think that she's still that same girl in the 60s, right? But I think that she's not looking at Kamala the character, but rather looking at what Kamala represents. Mm-hmm. And I think that is what she's basking in.
That's a good thing.
I mean, I think it also could be, the fact that, it's like you said, like Angela has made these great sacrifices, right? And so she was banned from the state of California, and she was, kept from teaching. I've never heard of a person being banned from a state, but she was, right? So all of these ideas and ideologies that she was touting was completely anti-oppression. It was completely anti-capitalism, which in a very oppressive and capitalistic nation, she's seen as dangerous, right? And so the type of threats that have been made on her life and the type of danger that she's been placed in, for her now to be at a place where people know her name and they're reading her books and her work is, followed her through time, it could be just like, okay, now I'm here, let me just take a moment to breathe. You know what I mean? And for you, younger sister, to know her work and to be able to take those ideas and now expand it beyond the time frame of an Angela Davis. Like, I think that's the part that she really may just be basking in. Is like, I gave it to him. Mm-hmm. I gave him everything I could give him. I took as far as I could take him. Right? I can't take him no further.
And I feel like for me, I'm thankful for her for that much. You know what I mean? And I also understand that what she has taught us is how to critique, and even if that's her. And I was very critical about John Lewis because as congressman in Georgia and Atlanta, he treated my organizing friends poorly, right? But I also understand that John Lewis also had his limitations, and I think the politic for me is to revere no one. Right. And it's really to end this celebrity culture of our civil rights leaders, that they are not fighting for justice because it's cool and trendy. It's because they're fighting for their lives. And when they can no longer fight for their lives, we are fighting for our lives and their lives. Right.
I love that.
Yeah, we can't do that if we're revering them as people who cannot be critiqued, because we have to know their limitations. Right. And that's important for me. Their limitations are not necessarily the end for the fight and the struggle. So that's why they are not above critique.
Mm-hmm. I love John Lewis, but one thing, I'm glad you said that. Like, I'm so glad, because I love John Lewis, and I've had the opportunity to meet him a few times. Of course, I was fanning like everyone else, putting pictures on social media of me and John Lewis. But one issue that I've always had with John Lewis and what John Lewis represents was, I always said that our Black leaders of the 70s, 80s, and 90s failed the Black community. And I will say that to the end, because they all decided to stop being activists and start being politicians. And there is a conflict of interest there. There is no way that you can truly fight this system if you are going to go in and compromise so that you can somehow now gain finances and gain wealth from this same system that you are supposed to be trying to dismantle. So as much as I love him, that was a critique that I've always felt. I never said it publicly, but since you said it first, it'll be your fault. But I've always said it in the backwoods that this is a problem. They failed us. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X was killed, and that was it. We didn't get another Black leader until they created, Oprah went and found Barack Obama. And that is sad.
And for me, this is how whiteness works. It infiltrates. It subdues our leaders. It creates this politic of pacifism. It disarms violence. It represses our emotional and visceral responses to fighting and resisting, right? And so, if I'm marching across the bridge and I'm getting beat in my head every 5 seconds, and this neoliberal Black culture is telling me, first I see them deify Martin Luther King, and I see it's possible for me. This is the residue of whiteness. You know what I'm saying? And to whatever extent we're all easily seduced by it, it's to the extent that we have to be ready when people are ready to resist us. And so that's just what it is.
I think that's the most agitating part about whiteness. because now you have to choose. Do I survive? Do I keep fighting, or do I conform? Right? And so when you're in those spaces, especially when you're in academic spaces, and you are trying to be this voice and this beacon, and you're trying to be, the enlightened one, and you're trying to bring all of these things to these folks with your own limits, and then you end up falling from grace, like some of my own favorite academics have. Then I have to think about what you just said when you say, I can't revere you, right? I have to know that you are human and you are enticed, just like I can be enticed. And I have to be able to know that this may be the limit of your paradigm, and still love you within that limit of your paradigm.
And know that's where you enter. You know what I mean? Because it's like where your limitations are is where I start fighting. So if you just so happen to get in the fight on the way, just know that these were your limitations, not mine. And I think that that's fair. I think that's fair. This is fair ground for everybody, because at the end of the day, as much as we know that whiteness is that bad, we are not void of accountability, and we're all complicit. And to the extent that we're all complicit is to the extent that we are all a part of this cultural production of evil, to quote Emily Towns. And so that's what it is.
Rebecca, this has been so beautiful. I know that we could talk all night long. And I'm not getting on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram tonight because I'm feeling very revolutionary right now, and I don't want to get in more trouble. So I'm going to take a nap like old people do and wake up and then have some coffee. But I want to thank you so much. And I hope that you just keep shining and keep teaching, because that's what you are ultimately doing. You are teaching. Guys, if you don't mind, make sure that you share this, invite a friend, inbox a friend, share it on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Truth to Power Uncut. And we're just so grateful. Like, I love you so much.
I'm so excited about your little sister. You have no idea.
Yeah, and
I'm so happy to meet you, and please, let's connect.
Aurelia is chilling tonight because I guess she don't want to kill us with so much blackness. But you and Aurelia are like really, y'all are soul sisters. Trust me.
I felt it. The questions you asked were very helpful, because Coach King would tell you, I was like, can you give me questions beforehand? Because I'm normally forced into spaces where they ask very moderate questions that they know are going to be antagonistic to me. So I really appreciate how you all engage me.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I heard it when you started talking. I was like, "Oh, Marks. Oh, that's my jam. That's my jam." So
my God.
You have no idea. I'm so glad that we were able to connect. Let's stay connected. Yeah. Whatever you're doing, that I can support you in any kind of way. You have made me just proud. Like, you have no idea.
So proud. So proud. Well, in the spirit of our show, we always end with a quote. So tonight, I decided to do James Baldwin. He's one of my favorite black men. And on the sidebar, I would love to have a conversation with either one of you or both of you at the same time. But I don't smoke cigarettes, but I'm going to smoke one, because I think of Nikki Giovanni and James Baldwin's conversation in Paris in 1979.
Yes.
And I would just love it, because I'm older, y'all are young. Nikki was like 29 at the time or something, like, because at that point, James Baldwin had started caving in, but that's a whole other story. But anyway, James Baldwin's quote that I absolutely love is, "It is certain in any case that ignorance allied with power is the most ferocious enemy justice can have." Mm-hmm. So that's definitely one of his boom pops. But it has been beautiful. I love you. I love you, Aurelia. Give a big shout out to Dr. Goodluck, Dr. GL, that makes it all come together so well. Oh, GL makes it come together so well. I think I gave him a program. I'm sending an invoice. But thank you so much, Aurelia, for joining me tonight. And thank you, Rebecca. The soon-to-be Dr. Rebecca Wilcox. She probably won't know about doctor because she'll probably be, you know,
abolish the academy.
we were talking about Angela Davis when she got put out of California. We prayed that you don't get put out of Princeton Theology.
I think they're gonna love it too much. They can't. They need her.
Well, she's gonna one day be the person that they're gonna put on a marquee to try and get other students to come to Princeton.
That looks like her.
They're gonna commodify me, and y'all gonna let them. Y'all gonna celebrate it.
And I'm gonna say, I told her.
I told them. I sure am. I'm gonna celebrate all. Yes, I am. And then we can have a backroom conversation about what's really
Well, thank you all for joining us tonight. I hope that you all enjoyed all of this education that this sister gave y'all, because she laid it out plain. And we're going to get all of her information so you can follow her. Her page is definitely exactly what she is on here, and that is educational. So thank you, my sister. Thank you, Aurelia. Until the next time, remember, if you are not speaking truth to power, you are not fighting power. You are simply blowing kisses in the wind. Until next time, thank you and have a nice weekend.
See y'all too.
And that little girl was me.